Okay. Hello. Good evening. Good morning. Good afternoon, wherever you may happen to be. Hang on, let me just fix a few things. Good to see you. I am Tad. I'm going to be reading. It is really warm here in my office today. I'm just telling you. So if you see me mopping my face or even weeping tears of heat exhaustion, that's why. But it's nothing too bad. And once, by the time I get finished, it'll probably be cooler outside and we can open some stuff around here. Anyway, so as I explained to people last night, not a huge amount to relate. We are in a very complicated long-term turnaround. Other than that, we are making plans. Deb and I are actually going to go visit the UK, which we haven't done for several years. And that's a good thing, and that's going to happen in September. Anybody who happens to be in the UK in the middle of September, we're going to be at British Fantasy Con in Birmingham. And other than that, not a lot of stuff to talk about, really. Just dealing with various things, family, people moving here, moving there, back and forth, taking care of stuff. I was reading a David Sedaris book today, and he quotes Saul Bellow as saying that something to the effect of losing a parent is like driving through a plate glass window. You don't see it until you hit it, and then there's just, glass everywhere, and you're picking out shards for a long time to come. And I think that's true in a number of ways, not just emotionally, of course, but all the practical stuff as well. So we're definitely picking out the glass shards as far as all that stuff goes. And it's complicated and confusing. We've got to deal with the house, but we've also got to deal with it through the estate, for lack of a better word. Meaning that everything has to be done in a certain way and kept track of, and et cetera, et cetera. Meanwhile, we have the neighbors complaining because we haven't had a landscaper out to fix the garden, which had gone to seed during the time my dad was living here after my mom died. So anyway, I don't think the neighbors I don't think the neighbors who were unhappy about the yard were aware of that fact. So they have been informed, and we will see what happens. But it's not a big deal. I don't mean to suggest it's like some big ongoing thing. Anyway, but there's just a ton of that kind of stuff going on. So I have finished Navigator's Children, at least as far as my version of it goes. There will be a process of copy editing, and then eventually having it being put into the form of proofs, which means it has been typeset. These days, it's not actual type that it is primarily set on first. It is computer type. But that has to be done, and then I get the copy edited version back, and et cetera, et cetera. But that's all still up the road, and I'm pretty much done with my version of it. And so I'm going to be working on things like the last Ordinary Farm book, which is only 10 or 15 years overdue. And let me think, what else? About to get started on The Splintered Sun, which will, as far as I know, failing any weird last-minute changes that I can't see coming now, that will be my next new book, in the sense of something from scratch, although it does take place in Oostenrijk. And I'll tell you more about that as I work on it. Maybe even read some excerpts as I start writing it. I'm still in the notes and world building phase of it, since it takes place several hundred years before the Dragonbone Chair, but several hundred years after the book we're reading right now, Brothers of the Wind. Although there are a few common characters, which is one of the advantages, one of the advantages of writing about characters who live a very long time. You can skip a few hundred years and still bring back some of your characters, which I've been taking advantage of for years and years and years, for yonks, as we used to say in the UK, which means the same thing, a long time. Actually, it's a very interesting word. I haven't thought about where that comes from before. I'm going to have to look that up. Anyway, let me just quickly check in and see who, if anybody, has showed up to say hello. And of course, comments are, as usual, extremely confusing. And Melissa says, howdy, Tad. In BC, which I am assuming is British Columbia, not hot but not on fire yet. In BC, but not on fire yet. Oh, no, it could be Baja California, which would be also on the West Coast. Anyway, so let me just check in and see who has said hello or who has registered their presence so far. Melissa, hello, and that was you that I just responded to. Margaret. Jeremy, hello, Jeremy. Becca, good to see you. Tim, a pleasure, as always, to see Claudia. Hello, Claudia. Okay, and Kristen. Hi, Kristen. Tracy, nice to see you, Tracy. Emily, good to have you. I hope your con was a good one, your most recent one. Isaac, hello, Isaac. Barban, hello, hello. Jennifer, and that's Jennifer Russo. Nice to have you with me. Ray, good to see you. Jack Barucha, a pleasure. Christy, good to see you. Mark, my friend, Mark Gambal. Good to see you, Mark. And Susan, we were just talking about you, by the way, Mark, just the other day. Nothing but good. Susan, hello, that's Susan Shamblin. And Jaza or Jaza or Yaza or, well, it could be any number. You'll have to remind me. If you've already told me, I apologize for having forgotten. Penny, I think I already said hello to, but I'm not sure. So if I didn't, consider it as being said again. Jack asks, I heard you were going to England. Any chance of you ever doing fan event on the East Coast? Yeah, I used to do it all the time. It's been the combination of changes in publishing and, of course, COVID. And that just kind of crippled all normal book touring. But that should change again. And I definitely intend to get back to the East Coast. I've got tons of friends there. My publishers are there, all kinds of reasons for getting back. So yes, that will happen. I don't know when exactly, but I will certainly let people know ahead of time. A new name, I think. Anyway, Thomas Benzenhafer. So hello, Thomas. Good to see you. And let me see if there's anything else I need to check out here. I don't know why this won't give me comments. I mean, it's a continual source of frustration for me. It'll give me a list of who made comments, but it won't tell me it won't show me the actual comments. Anyway, whatever. I'm tired of struggling with this nonsense. What else is there to talk about? Not really a huge amount, to be honest. It's just been super busy, as usual. And at the same time, it's been absolutely stultifying because so much of the stuff that we're doing right now has to do with filling out forms, with getting on lists for things, with making appointments, dealing with, we're in charge of 2 different houses at the moment, and we have just moved some of our relations into one of our houses, and we're in the other one, but we're responsible for getting things done at both of them, and it's boring. I mean, there's not really much sense in rattling on and on about it to you people, because I'm sure you all have stuff like that to deal with in your own lives. We all know what a scam the modern world is. You know how those of us who are old enough to remember will recall when they were talking about the oncoming paperless office and the information age, and how everything was going to be so much smoother, with the internet and printers and all this stuff coming in. And there was this, as is always the case, and this is just a fact of life. Anytime there is an introduction of an important new technology, there's a group of people, and I've said this many times, there's always a group of people who say, this is going to destroy civilization. And at the same time, there's another group of people who go, no, this is going to be the greatest thing that ever happened. It's going to make everything good. And of course, neither of them are right. It's always a mixed bag. And there's always stuff that happens that's incredibly annoying that didn't happen with the old technology. But there are improvements too. So, but the idea that, the paperless office and God, when I was working at Apple back in the day, because we kept getting this propaganda about the paperless office, at the same time as we were being absolutely blizzarded with paper memos. Several of us started keeping boxes in our cubicles, I guess, for lack of a better term. Keeping boxes in our cubicles to just put our paper into, to show how much paper we were still getting, while we were also supposed to be answering all these things in our internal office email, which at the time was only Apple. This was before publicly available email, which shows you how long ago it was. Anyway, so that's what we're dealing with at the moment, is everything you have to go online, but then you have to print out forms, and then you have to send the forms to somebody, or you have to fax them to somebody, or you have to scan them, and blah, 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 blah. And you multiply that times about 40, and you have a recipe for irritation and frustration, which is where we're at. It's all, of course, exacerbated by the fact that it's hot, stuffy, and I am in a very hot office right at the moment, but I cannot run a fan because you wouldn't be able to hear me properly. And since theoretically the only thing I'm really offering here is the fact that I am reading, if all you could do was see me going, and meanwhile what you were hearing was, you know, of a fan going, it wouldn't really work. Excuse me, I'm going to mop my brow. Okay, so that's where we're at. That's what's up. I will be missing some readings in the middle of September, but I will tell you about those when the dates are absolutely nailed down. Until then, expect for me to keep reading. I'd like to try and get the book finished. I don't know if I've got enough time before then. That's what's up. So I am going to pull up my copy of the book, and I am going to go ahead and start reading. So, let me see. Okay, so where we were is Hakatri, of course, wounded by the dragon's blood, in terrible pain, also having strange dreams because of it. Pamon Kes, who is his armiger, which is basically his squire and servant, was sent off to go back to Ravensperch and talk to Zaniko and try to get him to come to Azua to help find ways to alleviate the suffering of Hakatri. Although that brought Pamon back into contact with Lady Ona and Lady Sholi once more, it did not achieve its goal, and he had to return to Azua. Now, Hakatri has decided that he is at the point where he's willing to try a lot of different things. So they are go off to Nakiga, which is where the Norns live, or the Hikadaya, as their formal name is. So they're going off to Queen Utuku's home. Now this, of course, is hundreds of years before the open warfare between the Norns and the Scythi, or even the open hostility. So nominally they are still allies because they are relatives of each other. So they have just gone a long, long, long way. And all the way up to the north, this is Hakatri, Pamon Kes, our narrator, and Inaluki, who has come along for some reason that is not quite clear. Anyway, so I'll just start from where I'll step back here, and I will start reading. So this is continuing with Brothers of the Wind. We had just finished a very long journey across the barren snowfields and the colder mountainous uplands called Cruel Winds, and I was quite weary. I stared at the strange buildings and statue-haunted crossings as we made our way through the open spaces of Nakiga's main level, but I could not summon much interest. The streets were dark and wide, and a somber image of Druki the White Prince, Utuku's dead son, seemed to watch us wherever we went. The roaring waters of the gigantic Tearfall, which plummeted down from somewhere high in the mountain and filled half of Nakiga with spray, could be heard in all parts of that ground level, except behind the thickest walls. And I glimpsed other sights just as astounding. Park gardens of ghostly white fungus, massive temples as dark inside as the bottom of a well, even when crowded with Nakiga folk. But all of them seemed like shadows to me. Now I mourn all that I failed to study or even notice, since I doubt I will ever see that strange, secretive city again, and it is unlike any other. I was, of course, mostly worried about my master. He had taken a turn for the worse as we approached the mountain, his dreams becoming ever more florid, and his intervals of sense more widely separated. As we trudged through the steaming mists that seemed to choke every street and public place in the Hikedaya stronghold, Hakatri moaned and cried out in his litter. I always found it hard to comfort him at such times, because I could not touch him. When he was suffering badly, even the lightest stroke against his skin felt to my master like the burn of a red-hot iron. Distracted by his misery, I remember little of our long, slow passage up the massive ceremonial stairs to the upper levels, where High Celebrant Hiki led us to the house that had been provided for us, a nearly windowless block of stone from the outside, a shadowy labyrinth inside. In the days that followed, I scarcely left Lord Hakatri's side, as he was visited by healers and even a few of the Nakiga nobles. If I had been largely ignored by the important folk of Silverhome and Skyglass Lake, I had at least been treated with courtesy as a valued servant. Utuku's courtiers did not even seem to see me. But I had not expected anything different. I knew the Hikedaya thought of my folk only as slaves, and I was there for my master, not myself. I did my best within the strictures of my duty to ignore them as thoroughly as they ignored me. In truth, even if I had been well treated, I would have been unhappy in Nakiga. The weight of the queen's rule kept her subjects abject and largely mute, and the few of my own Tanukadaya people I encountered were all slaves. Unlike most other places I have visited, even in the mortal lands, the endless, shadowy streets did not make me want to explore them. The darkness in which the Hikedaya lived seemed not merely an absence of light, but the actual manifested spirit of the hidden city. The healers who came to our lodgings minutely examined my master, staring, poking, and asking questions, sometimes with such aggressive interest that they persisted even after he had fallen asleep. Sleep he always badly needed, since it was one of his only ways to escape the pain of his wounds. But with my master's sleep came dreams, and the Nakiga folk seemed fascinated by these as well. Chief of these observers was one Lord Yedade, who I learned was the son of Urudade, one of the Hikedaya's chief philosophers when the garden was still our home. The one, in fact, that some claimed had loosed unbeing and thereby caused his own death and the garden's destruction. Despite this, Yedade was apparently as prized for his learning by the Queen's Hamaka clan as his father had once been, and he certainly showed no signs of shame over what his sire might have done. Yedade had the most colorless skin of any Hikedaya I had ever seen, not merely white, but almost transparent. At certain angles, it seemed I could see all the way down to his veins and the workings of his muscles and bones, which moved like ornamental fish swimming in a cloudy pond. Yedade was also achingly thin, but his dark eyes were very large and frighteningly intent, as though every single thing he saw was an object of surpassing interest, with scant distinction between the living and the unliving. In the days after our arrival, Lord Yedade and his fellow philosophers spent a great deal of time clustered around my master's bed. But unlike the healers, they seemed far more interested in the malady than in the sufferer. They even scraped at his burn scars and took the bits away in folded squares of parchment. Neither could I make any sense of many of the things they asked him. "When the fit is on you, do you see a wall or curtain of deep red?" Yedade would ask, as if something useful could be gleaned from the visions of a fever dream. "Do you hear voices? What language are they speaking?" Sometimes one or two of the Lords of Song, Utuku's order of high mages, joined Yedade at my master's bedside. I particularly remember one named Karkaraji, because he was extremely old and had long yellow fingernails that curved like claws. I never heard him speak. He communicated with his fellow singers only in gestures, the secret language of signs his order use among themselves. The more ordinary Hikedaya healers who attended Hakatri were not as obtrusive as the mages, but neither did they bring my master any true relief, despite all their pastes and salves and the many unpleasant liquids they made him swallow. We stayed in Nakiga for most of the lynx moon. During that time I saw little of my master's brother, Lord Inaluki, but was told by one of the healers that he alone of our company had been invited to the royal palace, the Omeo Hamak, to meet with Queen Utuku. Inaluki came to visit his brother after this meeting, but I was sent from the room and do not know what passed between them. My master Hakatri was in agony at the time, almost insensible with pain, so I doubt he had much to say or, in fact, heard much of what Inaluki told him. It was not a comfortable visit, and not a comfortable place. During our stay in Utuku's underground city, I felt currents, heard whispers, and saw shadows around me that I could not fully understand, as though the people of that city were all engaged in some secret conversation about a subject I did not comprehend. The misty streets, what little I saw of them, seemed haunted, and not just by the ever-present effigies of Druki, the queen's son, whose memorials were everywhere. From the conversations I did hear, people of that strange city seemed to care only about things that had happened in the past, seemed to believe the present era was little more than an illusion, something to be endured while worshipping things and places and people now lost beyond hope. In the end, it became clear that Nakiga's healers could not help my master. I was not sorry when we decided to leave that place. We had planned next to travel west to Hikehikayo, the other great mountain city, but Lord Inaluki insisted that a journey there would be useless. The Queen says that the few healers left in that city are far behind what can be done here in Nakiga. Which was nothing. Hakatri's face was pale and damp with perspiration after one of his bouts of intense suffering. All the more reason not to risk journeying a long way across the freezing north, Inaluki told him. The Queen says that nothing like what happened to you has ever happened before, and she is the oldest of us all by many, many great years. She says we would learn nothing new in Hikehikayo. Queen Utuku seems to have shown you much favor, my lord, I said. I am not one of those who hate her, Armiger. His tone was hard, grudging. I think if Hakatri had not been there, his brother might have spoken to me much more sharply. She has her own people to protect, her own lands to defend. My master roused himself a little. Remember? Her people are our people, brother. But that was all he found the strength to say, and we did not travel on to Hikehikayo. Halfway through our journey back across the seemingly endless snowfields, we had to stop for 2 full days because my master's suffering became so terrible that he could not bear even to have his litter carried. In the middle of the second night, with only myself and one of our Azua healers present, Hakatri sat up, gasping in pain, and cried out, She is behind the veil, too. Her tracks are everywhere. He grabbed my hand with such desperate strength that I could not use it without pain for the rest of the day, but those were the only words he spoke that I could understand. Afterward he fell into a fit, thrashing and moaning until my heart nearly broke. When Hakatri could be carried again, we continued back across the snowfields. But when we reached Great Redwash, he came up from his swoon like a deep diving swimmer, and declared that we would not go home, but instead turn southwest toward the city of Mezutua. I protested, but he said, I promised Inazashi's heir that I would come to Silverhome to make my apology for taking the witchwood tree from his grove. Who knows if I will ever be well enough again? Honor demands I take this opportunity. A part of me shuddered. After all, honor had led us to this terrible situation in the first place, though it had been Inaluki's honor, not my master's. Still, I no longer had much faith in its value at all. When I said this to the healer who had accompanied us from Azwa, though, she looked at me as though I had suddenly begun to speak a foreign tongue. She simply could not grasp what I was saying. I do not like your master's choice, of course, she said. I am running out of what I need to make the salve that helps him, so I wish we could return directly to Azwa. But we cannot take away from him the little he has left. Do you mean his life? I said, trying to keep my anger down, but not entirely succeeding. Because the more he travels, the more I fear for his survival. She only shook her head. Like the other healers, she was kind and compassionate, but it was one of the times I felt I did not understand my master's people at all. This time, because of my master's frailty, we did not enter Mezutua from Skyglass Lake and the Fernlight Passage, but followed the ancient Silver Way up into the mountains to the city's proud southern gate, with my master still in his curtained litter. Word of our return had spread, and after we were admitted to Silverhome, the streets of the underground city filled with citizens eager to see us. Inaluki seemed to enjoy the attention and the crowds, but my master barely opened the curtains on his litter. He was in dreadful pain, I could tell, but determined to do what he had promised. We carried Hakatri at last to the site of witness, where Inazashi was holding court in the shimmering glow of the shard. I saw no sign of Kai Unyu, his supposed co-ruler. The lord of Mezutua's narrow features were set in hard, unhappy lines as he watched Hakatri's litter being carried down the steps toward the center of the vast chamber. His heir, Yizashi, watched too, features carefully empty of emotion, although it was not difficult to guess that what he had allowed Hakatri and Inaluki to do in Inazashi's witchwood grove had been the subject of many hard words between father and son. "So, Lord Hakatri, you return to us at last," Inazashi said when the litter had been set down at the foot of the dais. "I told you I would give you no assistance in trying to kill the worm. You took what you wanted anyway. Do you come now to beg forgiveness or to boast about your great deed?" I could see the angry flush on Inaluki's face, even by the shards in constant glimmering light. "You said you would give us no soldiers to help us, Inazashi," he said, and did not hide the bitterness he felt. "We took no soldiers. We took a tree, a single tree. You took a sacred tree of the garden root from my grove, stole it, and, worse, you made my son your accomplice. For that alone I should banish you from the Silverhome lands forever. Yet here you sit, unashamed. Your brother will not even show me his face, though I am told he was the leader of the company." "How do you dare?" Inaluki cried, and a rustle of dismay went through the room. I saw several Silverhome guards reach for their weapons. "Stop!" called Hakatri from inside the curtained litter, and though he did not speak loudly, could not at that time, Inaluki was startled into silence. Even Inazashi seemed to pause, as if waiting to see what would happen next. The curtain trembled and slowly drew back. My master clambered out of the litter to stand swaying beside it, his robes rumpled and damp with perspiration. Lord Inazashi is right, he said. All around the great chamber, the members of the Silverhome clan stared in wide-eyed surprise. It was not my master's obvious frailty that startled them so much as his visible wounds, I think, those ghastly burns on his neck and arms that were still bright and red even after the change of many moons. It was also clear by his panting breaths and quivering limbs that he had expended a huge amount of strength simply to leave the litter, but even the most observant of the Mezutuans would not have guessed from his stolid face the agony in which he spent each day. His brother knew, the other servants and I knew too, and we were all amazed that Hakatri was standing at all. "My lord," he said to Inazashi, "I have done wrong to you, and I admit it. I did not plunder your grove for my own gain, but I still regret the necessity that made me a thief and made you a victim." His brother Inaluki clearly did not agree. Inaluki's pride was also his curse, I had heard some of his fellows say, and at that moment I could see him struggling with it. His better nature, or at least his more cautious nature, won out. He stayed silent. "That is all well and good," said Inazashi, "but the story does not change. You came into my grove and took one of the sacred witchwood trees without permission, in darkness and secrecy, and you made my son your accomplice. If this were Nakiga, that would bring a judgment of death." Inaluki's eyes bulged at this, but Hakatri stared at him, and his younger brother somehow remained silent. "Your son was given a difficult, even desperate choice to make, Sue Inazashi," said my master. "He let his conscience guide him, as did I, and as you will." "What does that mean?" The master of Mezutua narrowed his eyes. Hakatri began to walk toward the dais. Each step was slow and difficult, and everyone present could see the perspiration beginning to bead on his face as he struggled forward. Inaluki turned away, whether in shame or sympathy I could not tell, as Hakatri at last reached the first step of the dais, a short distance from Lord Inazashi's feet. He swayed as if he would fall then, and Yazashi reached toward him, but my master waved him away. Hakatri bent first one knee, then the other, gasping with pain at every movement, though he tried his best to hide it. Sweat was dripping down his cheeks as he lowered himself to the step. It was a terrible spectacle, like watching some great beast pierced by many arrows finally giving up its life. With a final, muffled groan, Lord Hakatri dropped to his knees before Inazashi. When he spoke, his obvious suffering made it hard to understand him. "I am yours, Lord Inazashi. We are all of the garden, and that means we must honor all that we share. I have wronged you. If you would take my life for my crime against you, it is yours." I was so horrified by my master's agony that I did not notice for long moments that Inazashi was staring down at him and that the Lord of Mezutua's eyes were red, as if with welling tears. "Someone help Lord Hakatri back into his seat." Inazashi's voice sounded nearly as unsteady as my master's. "By the garden that birthed us all, you are forgiven, son of Year Dancing House. You are forgiven." Part 4. The Gray Lands. Hang on, give me a moment to mop my brow again. and the top of my head. Part 4, The Grey Lands. Only a few moons ago it was your brother who refused to go back to Azua, I said to Hakatri, and you called him stubborn. Now Ineluki is returning, but you will not. I had never spoken to my master in such a way, but I was frightened for him. I do not understand this, my lord. You think I should return home? He demanded. Return to what? A life that is barely a life? I cry out in my tormented sleep until no one else in my house can rest. I cannot hold my wife in my arms because the pain is too great. And my child. I had never seen Hakatri so despairing. Do you know what Briseyu said when we spoke through the witness last night? That our daughter, Likimea, wants to know when her true father will finally come back. My own daughter no longer recognizes me. I am so altered by this dragon curse. And you want me to return to Azua? His teeth were clenched against the agony of his wounds, but he was angry too. Will you now also turn away from me, Pamon? I was shocked that he had shared the private words of his wife, something I could never have imagined, and even more wounded that he should question my loyalty, but I knew it was only his suffering that made him chide me. I will never turn away from you, my lord. You chose me and raised me up when no one else of your folk would have given me a second look. But that does not mean I will stay silent when I fear you are making a dreadful mistake. But in truth, it was only in this strange new world in which we found ourselves that I dared to question him. Some things had changed. It could not be argued. Lord Ineluki was leaving Silverhome to ride back to Azua, along with several of those who had accompanied us this far. I did not blame him for departing, since he could do nothing to make Hakatri better, and it must have been particularly terrible for him, as the maker of that terrible, fateful oath, to watch his brother's continual suffering. The two brothers saying their farewells was one of the saddest things I have ever witnessed. They had so much love for each other, and yet could not embrace. As Ineluki struggled for words, Hakatri stopped him. Do not fear for me, brother, my master said. If unbeing itself could not destroy our people, a few spatters of worm's blood will not take my life away. We will see each other again. So saying, he raised his hand in parting. Ineluki bowed his head and kept his face expressionless as he mounted Bronze. As he rode away, he did not look back. Hakatri and I, along with half a dozen retainers and guards to carry my master's litter, made a slow journey out of the mountains that hid Mizutua and down to the coast, coming at last to the harbor town of Daiyoshoga, Lady Ona's and Sholi's former home. It was inhabited by many Zedaya, a few pale-skinned Hikidaya, and a surprising number of mortal men and women. Those folk, however, called the place Kranhir. Tanukadaya lived there too, of course, as they still do in most port towns, north or south, and as I had gathered from the women at Raven's Perch, the old Niski families of Daiyoshoga, though they were fewer than in the past, were proud of their heritage and took a leading role in the trade that was the town's main activity. But though the port was a busy one, few Zedaya ships called there, so we bought passage on a merchant ship out of the kingdom of Naban. Despite the uneasiness of its mortal crew at our presence, we voyaged with them south along the coast to the broad rocky island of Kementari, which had been one of the greatest residences of my master's folk. The famous city of the same name was only ruins now. It had been thrown down by the same shaking earth that had destroyed Jinnah-Sene. As we made our way inland from the largely derelict harbor, we could see the disheveled remains of wide ceremonial roads and the tumbled stones of what had once been proud walls. Their legendary facing of striped sardonyx, which had once made the city walls gleam so brightly that the approach to Kementari had been called the Dazzling Way, had long since been plundered. This once proud, now gutted metropolis was not one of the cities given to the Tanuka-Daya to rule by Genjiana. But when Hakatri and I came there, the remnant of my folk and of my master's folk were still living together in relative harmony. The Hikedaya, who had lived beside them during Kementari's greatest days, were gone, though. They had fled soon after its walls and palaces fell, heeding Utuku's demand for all her clansfolk to join her in Nakiga. The Zidaya and Tanuka-Daya, who still remained in Kementari's ruins, spoke bitterly of how the Hikedaya had claimed the city's master witness, an object called the breathing harp, and carried it away with them to their new home. This outrage had taken place many great years in the past, but as we sat with Kementari's leaders in the empty stone shell of what had been the Temple of Witness, those who remained mourned as though it had just happened. It hurt me to see these sad remains of what had been one of the famously beautiful 9 cities, and I know it hurt my master too. Where once a great population had lived, trading up and down the mainland coast in their swift ships, now only 1,000 or so hung on, more than a few of them recent mortal settlers. Kementari and its citizens had once thrived, passed through its port. Now they survived only because of the goats and sheep that grazed the hills at the center of the island, and the farmsteadings that grew grain and root vegetables. Despite this, the Zidaya of Kementari were still so proud of their ancient heritage that though my master desperately wished to help them, he could not do it openly. He made instead a secret gift to the governors of the island, a sizable part of the gold we had brought so we could trade in the mortal lands. We left it behind in their plundered Temple of Witness so it would not be discovered until we were gone. I hoped that it helped them, especially my own Tanuka-Daya folk, most of whom eked out a meager living netting fish from their small boats or quarrying the rocky island's bones. As we made our way back down the broken and disrupted stones of the road that led to the port, I heard the calls of fisherfolk, both my own people and mortal men, and could not help remembering Inaluki's warning that soon the mortals would replace my master's folk everywhere. From Kementari, we took ship again and made our way south, and on a warm morning early in the tortoise moon, we arrived in the busy port of Naban itself, the heart of the great mortal kingdom. As I observed the teeming life of the broad harbor, big ships floating at anchor like sleeping ducks, as hundreds of smaller boats darted in and out among them like water striders, I was astounded by Naban's size and the nearly impossible task before us. I had never seen mortals in such numbers, never realized that so many mortals existed in all of the world, let alone squeezed into one city spread over a few hills. There might indeed be healers capable of helping us in such a vast place, but how would we find them? Lord Hakatri was one of the most widely known of his folk, so more than a few Nabani dignitaries waited to greet us when we landed. The general style of their dress was not greatly different from the herdsmen and other northern mortals, but they wore tailored capes instead of rough cloaks, and the cloth of their garments looked much richer and more colorful. Many also wore hats of shaped and dyed wool, some in forms I found quite puzzling, since they offered no protection against sun or rain and instead seemed created purely to amuse. The nobles who greeted us at the dock told my master he was invited to the Sansellen for an audience with the Imperator, their strange word for king, I assumed. But though Hakatri thanked them, with all ceremony he told them he was too unwell at present, and would have to put off the honor until he had recovered, and that he had come to Naban in search of a cure for his wounds. The dignitaries who welcomed us obviously spread the word of my master's poor health, because within a day of our arrival our place of lodging near the port was all but overrun with dozens upon dozens of Naban folk offering to help Lord Hakatri. A few were mortal philosophers and practical healers, and these my master bade me bring to him. But most of those who appeared before our doors each morning were either novelty seekers, only interested in meeting an actual Zediah lord, or fraudulent healers offering concoctions of common herbs, animal blood, graveyard dirt, and even less savory ingredients. Foolish nostrums more likely to kill an infirm person than to help. I put in hours before noon each day, ferreting out the one or two individuals worth taking to my master from the army of frauds and simpletons who clamored to see him. In the end, though, even the most gifted thinkers of the greatest mortal city had nothing new to offer him. Being Hakatri's gatekeeper was not all my duty in Naban, nor even half. With Inaluki returned to Azua, and just a few servants now remaining to take care of my master's most basic needs, I was the only one left who could soothe him when his agonies were at their worst, and we spent many nights sitting up together when the pain would not let him sleep. Sometimes we talked, but other times my master could not even do that, and then I read to him from his favorite poets, Tuya and Benhaya Shano, or from Diritu's Chronicles of History in the New Land, as he lay on his bed, shivering. Unimpressed by what I was seeing of Naban's mortal healers, I was determined to find healers of my own race for my master, as Lady Ona had suggested. Even Hakatri, hang on just a second, I lost my place there. Even Hakatri agreed that with their connection to the Dreaming Sea and the garden, the Tanuka Daya might offer our best chance against the curse of dragon's blood. But now, for the first time since the mistress of Raven's Perch had shamed me on my first night in her home, I truly regretted not speaking my ancestors' vow tongue, because few of the local Niskis spoke anything but a mixture of vow and the local mortal speech. This made my search almost maddeningly slow and full of misunderstandings, but I persevered, leaving Lord Hakatri's side for hours each afternoon, hours that I begrudged because I did not trust the rest of his retainers to tend him properly. Accompanied by one of my master's Zediah guards, I went hunting through the markets and taverns and sea watcher guild halls for anyone who might be able to help us. In the end, though I walked until my feet were sore and asked questions up and down the Naban waterfront until my throat was hoarse, what I had been seeking came to us instead. We had been in Naban for no short while. The tortoise moon and rooster moon had both passed when a young male Niski came to our inn. "I am Fenhasha," he told me. "I hear you and your master are looking for a true healer." "And that is you?" He shook his head, grinning. "No, but my aunt is the greatest healer in all the south." We Tanuka Daya are sometimes called changelings in mockery or even as an insult, but the name is not without reason, since it is our nature as a race to grow like the things that surround us. Those of us who live in far northern lands tend to become paler and better able to survive the cold. Those who live near the ocean, like the Niski folk, become more like sea creatures. It sounds strange, but it is true. And those, like me, born among the Zediah, have always looked more like those immortals than do the rest of our kind. But this Fenhasha, who came to our door, had been born into Naban's Sea Watcher community, and he had all the telltale signs. His eyes were large and heavily lidded. His arms were long, and he had the telltale Niski roughness of skin. I might even say scaliness, especially around his neck. I was not immediately ready to trust this stranger, though Fen-Hasha assured me that his aunt, Fen-Yona, was a healer of great renown who had cured many folk, rich and poor, mortal and otherwise. He did not ask for any payment in advance, which relieved some of my suspicions, and when I asked him for the names of those who could vouch for his aunt's skills, he gave me several, which also raised him in my eyes. Most of the false healers who had milled at our door would not even explain the details of what they would do for my master, cloaking their methods in secrecy, which is one of the chief weapons of all swindlers. Many of the people Fen-Hasha named were trading captains who had been troubled by strange maladies caught in the southern islands, maladies of both body and spirit, the Niski told me, but they were all at sea during that time of the year and could not be questioned. But a wealthy mortal woman spoke glowingly of Fen-Yona's skill, and told me that my master would not regret employing her. I think at any other time both my master and I would have wanted more proof of this healer's abilities, but Hakatri had been suffering grievously again in the most recent days and seemed willing to try almost anything, so we hired a boat to take us to this Fen-Yona's home. The craft was not in the most reassuring condition, but Fen-Hasha assured me its captain was a relative of his and was giving us a very good price. So the next morning we left Naban and set out across the bay for Tapu, the tiny island where the healer lived. I shall not spend long describing the journey or about meeting Fen-Hasha's aunt in her round hut near the shore, for reasons you will soon discover. The old Tanukadaya woman was pleasant enough, but she was vague about what she could actually do to heal my master. She first performed a ceremony that, as far as I could see, consisted mostly of spreading incense smoke as thickly as possible, while members of her family played a tuneless sort of music on flutes and drums. Then she pronounced that my master's condition was unusual and could only be helped by someone she called the Lady of the Star of the Sea, which would require another short voyage by boat. Having come so far already, we agreed, and we soon found ourselves aboard a small craft braving the rough swells, this time by night. After perhaps 2 hours' journey, we reached a spot a long distance from shore. It looked no different to me than any other part of the open sea, but the healer, Fen-Yona, bade the captain drop anchor. Then once more she began to chant and disperse smoke from an incense burner. But this time she added loud prayers addressed to the lady she had mentioned. I was beginning to doubt that anything at all would happen, and that we had spent our gold for nothing. But as she sang and waved her arms, I did finally notice a change in our surroundings. My master, who could barely sit upright, likely saw nothing but the odd dance that Fen-Yona was doing, but I could make out a faint light beginning to glow in the water beside the boat. At first I thought it only the shining tide that is sometimes seen on the nighttime ocean. But it grew brighter and brighter until I could make it out quite clearly. It was not a formless cloud like a shining tide, but a single spot of glaring green light. The astonishing thing, though, was that the green glow came from deep beneath the ocean's surface. When I announced this, Fen-Yona increased the violence of her dancing and chanting, crying, "The lady comes! The star of the sea is kindled!" My master did not take heed of any of this, but swayed back and forth with the motion of the small boat, his eyes tightly shut, struggling with agonies the rest of us could only imagine. Then, as the woman's song or prayer neared what sounded like some sort of loud peak, she stooped near my master to set down her incense burner, and I saw something flash in her hand. I thought it was a knife, so I flung myself between the Niski woman and Hakatri. She was startled and complained angrily about my intrusion. I demanded to see what was in her curled fingers, still fearing some kind of murderous attack, though I could imagine no reason for it. Our gold had been left safe on shore with my master's Zediah guards. The healer's nephew, Fen-Hasha, tried to pull me away from her. I may not have the strength of my master's folk, but I had trained with the young warriors of Azua, and now I was grappling with one of my own kind, protecting my master. As we struggled, I managed to get my foot behind Fen-Hasha's ankle and pushed him overboard. Instantly, his aunt began shrieking that the Kilpa would take him, that I must help him climb back onto the boat. At the time, I thought she exaggerated, but I was told later that Kilpa did swim around boats that dared the ocean by night, and would sometimes even snatch an unwary sailor off the deck and into the sea. I refused to help the Niski woman's nephew until she showed me what was in her hand. She called to her Tanukadaya relative whose boat we had hired, but he was struggling with his oars, trying to turn the craft against the push of the waves and back toward floundering Fen-Hasha. The woman finally spread her fingers to show me what was nestled in her palm, a shard of broken mirror. I understood everything then, and knew I dared not leave Hakatri's side, so I stood over him and left the boat's owner to drag Fen-Hasha back on board by himself. After much arguing and many threats, both mine and theirs, the Niskis at last carried us back to Tapu, which we reached as the first warm light of dawn was climbing into the eastern sky. We found another boat there and paid its owner to take us back to the Naban mainland, since I no longer trusted Fen-Hasha and his aunt or any of their numerous relatives. I was ashamed that our first visit to a Tanukadaya healer had turned out so woefully, but my master was overwhelmed with his own suffering and hardly noticed anything but the fact that he had not been healed. They were frauds, my lord, I told him when we were safely back on the mainland. Cozeners, tricksters, whatever you like. The green light, the star of the sea, as the Niski woman called it, must have been the sunken glow from the fabled green column, the master witness of Jinnah Sene, gone down beneath the ocean so long ago with the rest of the island city. We must have been floating just above the city's ruins. No, Hakatri said. The city and its islands sank far from where we were. But who knows? Perhaps Mezumiru's tides have rolled the pieces of the witness a great distance along the seafloor. But you said it began to glow in the deeps only after we reached it, Pamon, as if she had summoned its light. If they were only tricksters, how could that be? She had a piece of a witness hidden in her hand, my lord. I doubt she knew how to do anything more with it than to briefly wake the green column, but it would be a most effective way to fool mortals and those who are ignorant of history, would it not? For a moment he sat silent. It was not all false, though, Pamon. While we floated there, a new dream came to me. A very strong dream, like no other I have had. Whether they meant to rob us or not, something true was at work. It was much like what I have felt from the Pool of Three Depths in Azua and other master witnesses. All the more reason, then, after what happened to you in Serpent's Vale, that you should be kept away from those people and their foolish use of someone else's power. Who can guess what the untutored meddling of a Niski hedge witch might have done to you if we had not stopped her? I am not certain we did stop her, Hakatri said. The dream that came to me on the boat was strong, so strong, and I still feel it. A figure stood before me, slender, pale, and distant. It spoke to me in a woman's voice, saying, "Come to me. I have a message for you." It was so strong and strange. It did not feel like any of the other dreams I have had since the worm's blood burned me. He lifted his hands to his face as if to make certain he was still the same person. I no longer know what to do, Pamon, what to believe. And that is where I am going to stop. And with that, I am going to wrap it up for the night. I'm assuming that we stayed. Yes, we stayed and everything worked. Okay, very good. So what I am going to say then is thank you so much for joining me. It's a great pleasure, as always, to share time with you. I hope you had a good time watching me slowly melt. And oh, my beautiful wickedness. Who had ever thought? Anyway, sorry, I'm quoting the Wicked Witch of the West. Anyway, so that's about the fifth time I've said anyway. I will see you very soon. I will be back next week, both for the 1 a.m. and 7 p.m. readings, where we will continue, and we are about to go adventuring in the Ran. So we are going to see a bit of the swamps of Ostenard and things like that. So take good care of yourselves. If you are in Southern California, take especially good care of yourselves right at the moment. But anywhere you are, you're important. So take good care. Take good care of your loved ones, your friends and family, your neighbors. And as I always say, we will get through this together if we help each other. So again, thank you for joining me. Peace and good night, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you happen to be. Bye.